The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's PSMJ webinar, Change Ahead 2021 AEC Compensation and Benefits Practices Checkup. My name is Kathy Cesari of PSMJ and I'm thrilled to join you guys today. Before we get started with Jen Navard, I'd love to go over a couple of housekeeping details. First, we have a Q&A session. That will be at the end. Feel free to submit your questions, or if you have a question while Jen is speaking, don't understand something, she has graciously said that I can interrupt. But if we don't get to them, we're going to try to get to them at the end. And also she said that she will try to respond even after the webinar. So we're going to try to get everyone's answer their questions. Secondly, this is okayed for AIA credit, but you have to send a message with your AIA number to customerservice@psmj.com. You can also probably receive a credit by submitting to your own board, but we do not guarantee that. And we will share an attendance certificate to those who attend live. And speaking of that, you will get a message either later today or tomorrow at the latest that will have the link. It's going to be up on our YouTube channel, and we'll have an audio on our SoundCloud if people just want to listen, and your link to your certificate. And also I'm going to get the slides that Jen just sent me, and I'm going to make them a PDF and share those as well. I'll have a link for that. So look out for that. It's going to come from my email address, which is ccesari@psmj.com. All right, now that we have all those items out of the way, let's dig in and welcome Jen Navard.
So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, looking at changes ahead with dealing with compensation and benefit practices and checkup for your firms. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to look a little bit at what's happening in the current labor market. We're going to talk about your compensation model and some warning signs that perhaps you might want to make some changes, adjustments, how to stay competitive in a heating talent market, talk about key performance indicators when you're looking at your compensation and benefits, and how work from anywhere is impacting wages. A little bit about me, Jenifer Navard. I am a principal and director of finance of SVB Ripple. We are an architecture firm, about 50 plus or minus folks in New Orleans. We practice in New Orleans, Louisiana. Our practice is a national practice, but we are located all here. So I've been here about 17 years, which is my total experience in the AEC industry. Prior to that, I had financial positions in a number of different industries, so I bring sort of two views to the world of architecture, and that's sort of my business experience from other industries, and then now I've got a pretty deep understanding of how things work for us here in the AEC industry. The first thing we're going to talk about today is what's been happening in the current labor market. If any of you have been to any of the executive briefings or any of Dave's presentations, a lot of this is similar, but it is updated for December. Our market sector, architects and engineers, back in 2018, we'd gotten back to pre-recession levels, and we were steadily increasing. You see that big dip that happened during COVID, and now we're getting right back up there. So we're not much reduced from where we were. What is interesting about that graph there is that's the combination of architects and engineers. If you look at the two separately, you can see that while the engineers have, they hit their pre-recession levels back in 2016 and had well exceeded that by 2020, early 2020. It bounced back pretty robustly from COVID. Architects never had gotten back to their pre-recession employment levels and have taken the same deep dive, but aren't coming back quite as quickly as the engineers. It's also interesting, the point here, if you look at the the scale on the two graphs. While the graphs are the same size, the architecture represents about 220,000 employees, and engineers is about 1,050. So wanted to present a little bit of different from some of the things you see in Dave or Frank's presentations is the salaries. If you look at real dollars or inflation adjusted dollars, as you want to call it, if you look, our salaries in total were back up to pre-recession levels. They hadn't really gone above it as a group. We kind of stayed a little bit below it, and that's industry-wide. If you look at it in current dollars, you know, you've seen your salaries and wages have gone up, but they haven't gone up more beyond where they were relative to 2009 and 10, the pre-recession dollars. Kind of sort of a contra-indicator to what you saw with the employment levels, the salary levels in real dollars for architects, while our employment hasn't gotten up to pre-recession levels, our salaries have exceeded them. And that's a pretty interesting metric I saw there. And the engineers pretty much gotten back to pre-recession salaries, and they're driving that prior graph. When you combine architects and engineers, the engineers are driving it because they have such a large portion of the sample. Architects, though, are still paid less generally than engineers. So a couple little interesting data points there. And all this data is through December of 2020. So I have a couple of polls. I don't know about you guys, but I'm always interested in hearing how our firm is doing compared to everybody else. Something that was a little different when I entered the AEC industry is we spend a whole lot of, we're very interested in knowing how everybody else is doing or how everybody else does things. That was a little bit different for me from my other world. So if you guys can answer this question, I'm really interesting. What were your profits for 2020? Were they higher, lower, or about the same as they were in 2019?
And we'll give people a couple of seconds to answer. Okay, I'm going to close it now and share. All right, so people, 39% said higher than 2019, 41% said lower than 2019, and 19% said it's about the same.
And what I've been hearing and reading in a lot of different journals and economic reports is the later quarters for more firms we're starting to see. You know, we started out the year going full out gangbusters. We had a good bit of backlog going into COVID, and then as COVID progressed, things were getting a little more strained. I'm very curious to see what 2021 is going to bring, and so that's where the next question comes from. What do you think, what is your 2021 looking like? Is it higher, lower, or about the same as 2020?
Again, we'll wait till most people have answered. Pretty straightforward. A couple more seconds. I'm going to close. So we have higher in 2020 is 50%, lower than 2020, 12%, and about the same, 38%.
Yeah, so that's what our own firm's experience, right? Is we went into COVID, and I think some of this is dependent on the industry or the market sectors you serve. But you know, we started getting really a little antsy towards the end of 2020, but the first few months of 2021, starting to see things picking back up again. So I'm very, it's in, you know, for the economic side of me, you know, my degree is in accounting and I've been in business all of my career. So I've got this little economist kind of side of me that's really interested in seeing what the big metrics are gonna look like for our industry. And here's our last question. as we start this kind of just helps me set the tone of some of the conversations. But what are your return to work plans post-COVID? This is a huge question for us in our firm. We are really trying to figure this one out. So I thought I'd use this platform to see what everybody else is doing, so that we can, you know, as we finalize our decisions.
Just a few more seconds. Okay, I'm about to close. So all staff return to work in the office, 20%. Nobody said that all staff will remain working remote. 38% allow remote staff with set days and hours for working in the office. 23% report allow remote work with complete flexibility. And 20% said they haven't decided.
Yeah. So, and what's been interesting, I've got a slide kind of later on that'll show the proportions have changed a little bit as we've gone through COVID. And the consensus we're seeing the most of right now is we miss each other. We miss the social side of being in the studio together. And we're trying to figure out, how do we combine that? How do we get that social side figured out, but also keep our workflow going and keep our employees happy? So first thing we're going to talk about today is your compensation model and how some of your practices could be driving people away instead of making them stay. And we'll talk a little bit later in one of the bullet points here about what really matters to your staff. And compensation is one of the things where it might not make someone stay, but it will certainly make them leave if you don't get it right. In our industry, for the past, post-recession, turnover had taken a big drop once the recession got past us, and people were like, look, I just want some stability in my career, and turnover had really dropped. And as the labor market started heating up, we've been seeing an increase in turnover, and it wasn't nearly what it was. I started working in this industry at about 2003, and those earlier years, that turnover was pretty significant. I found that pretty interesting. But we've managed to reduce our turnover. I like to think it's because we've put in place some management tools, and we've started running our firms in a better way that's a little more focused on keeping our good employees and keeping them happy. Turnover is very expensive. I don't need to go into that with any of you. I'm sure you realize that on a daily basis. You spend about a year getting someone indoctrinated into your firm, and you get a year or two out of them, and then they leave. I think the average industry-wide is 3 to 5 years for younger staff when they're cycling in firms. So how do we keep our turnover as low as we possibly can? So here's some things to kind of not do, or ways to drive people away. If your compensation decisions, if your staff don't understand how their performance is impacting their compensation or their bonus, or how you make your compensation decisions, there's a deep level of insecurity they're going to have. And I have this philosophy, an aversion to a blank sheet of paper. I don't like blanks. And my goal is to fill in those blanks as much as possible, because if I'm not filling them in, their staff are going to be filling in them in on their own, and their answers are generally going to be inaccurate. And you're not going to, it just makes everybody miserable. So, where does compensation come from for our staff? It's a function of 4 factors. It's going to be the type of degree they have, civil engineer, mechanical engineer, architect, interior designer, how many years of experience they have, where they're practicing, where's their office, and then the real important, and the more years a staff has, that performance factor becomes more and more significant. So that, how are they performing compared to their peers in the industry, not just their peers within the firm. So that's a huge element. For people right out of college, pretty much the type of degree is going to be the primary factor. Once they've got 3 or 4 years of experience, performance becomes more significant. What I do is once a year, I do 3 to 4 education sessions with the firm each year. And the one right around the time we're starting salary reviews is I do a presentation on how we come up with our salaries, fill in these blanks for them. What metrics are we using and how are we looking at them? When it comes to management salaries, you pretty much can take out the type of degree and experience level, and you keep your office location and you keep their performance, but you add what their role in the firm is, right? So what are they doing? Are they, in operations? Are they technical? Are they business development? Are they, HR, administrative? How are they? What is their role in the firm is? And then the size of the firm. When you look at management salaries, you'll see that the size of the firm is really a factor in the salary range. So what are some common errors that we see with compensation strategy? One thing I think can get you in a lot of trouble is relying on position descriptions to set salaries. If you ever read the position descriptions in any of the surveys or the AIA engineering, the difference between an architect 1 and an architect 2 is not very, if you're reading the description, the main thing is the number of years. So relying on a position description is going to just sort of kind of set you up for some failure. Looking at regional survey data, and we'll get into this and I'll show some more info on it a little later, but you can have a region. I'm in the South, and that includes Dallas, Houston, New Orleans, Birmingham, Shreveport, Jackson, Mississippi. The salaries in those different cities are vastly different. Using a blended regional number for setting salaries is going to cause a lot of issues, set you up for failure. Consumer price index or inflation adjustments, using that. When I first started with EDR, that was a factor. Everybody will know what's the inflation adjustment this year. And I'm like, well, we can talk about the inflation adjustment, but that's not how we should be setting our salaries. That data, it doesn't reflect different cities. It doesn't reflect where your salary should be. It's a piece of information we use. I use it every year, but that isn't how we set our salaries. And I think the most important is not adequately differentiating your performance levels. I said, in the very beginning of a career, you don't know what their performance level is going to be, so everybody can start out at a very similar salary. But as staff progress, that performance factor should be not only a big piece of it, but it should be explained and it should be understood. So the other, what's your compensation model? What should it look like? You need to be competitive, and your total compensation needs to be understood compared to other people in your city doing the same thing and in your industry and nationally. So how do you know you're competitive? Obviously this is a PSMJ seminar, so one of the key set of metrics, and it's how I got to be doing these, because when I first came into this industry, that was one of the things, where do I get the information we need to make the right decisions? And PSMJ provides some of these wonderful tools. And what I really liked about them, because I am an accountant, is they're free. If I fill out the survey, I get the tools. So I thought that was really great. So there's 3 benchmarking tools that PSMJ will provide to you if you complete the surveys. I'm going to go into them real quick. I'm not going to go into too much details. Normally when I do a compensation class, it's a 5-hour class that I do. So I'm trying to condense a whole lot of this information into one. So I'm just going to kind of show you this benchmarking tool. I want you to see it. Hopefully a lot of you already do the surveys, but let's just go take a look at them real quick. The benchmarking tool you get after you complete the survey comes with this really great set of tools. The graphics are really useful because it highlights how your firm is performing compared to other firms, and you can change your peer group. You know, I like looking at the national, everybody in total, and I'll kind of later on sort of, you'll understand a little bit more of why I think that's the main set of data that I look at. I also will look at date firm by firm size. But you get this tool and it has these 4 different tabs. You can see compensation for all these positions by years of experience. It gives you the 25th percentile, the median, and the 75th, and it tells you where your firm is. What's even better is this nice graphical presentation that gets updated based on the peer group you selected. And then it'll give you your key benchmarks, and it'll tell you where you are, whether you're higher, lower, much higher, much lower. So it's a pretty nice tool. And like I said, you get this just by completing the survey. The management compensation tool sort of works the same way. You pick your peer group and you get your graphs and trends. It's got total compensation, but you can also see when you put in your data, you'll get some information on bonuses and how that factors in. So pretty useful little tools. When you get into this, you also get the bonus and benefits survey. This survey is only done every 2 years, but this year it's going to be a very robust survey. We've added a whole bunch of questions related to COVID, work from home, work from anywhere, furloughs, how people are handling paying for the technology, bunch of questions like that. It's a pretty nice set of data sets. You get similar benchmarks, all benchmarks, paid holidays, how bonuses are calculated, all of your vacation, pay time off, which holidays, all that kind of information is in this bonus and benefit plan survey. It helps you stay competitive. I do recommend using more than one set of survey data. As an architecture firm, I will use the PSMJ data, I look at the AIA data, and then I look at design intelligence because we're a design first firm. I find that is a really useful data set for us because it's firms who are most similar to us. And I think that's real important when you're comparing yourself to metrics from these surveys. Zweig and Dietrich or someone, I think I spelled Dietrich right. If I didn't, my apologies. I'm not as familiar with that survey. But find surveys that most align with your business type. And for our staff, I know that our staff is looking at that AIA survey, so that's why it's added. I think the design intelligence gives us a design specific set of survey, and then PSMJ is a much more broad set of data set. So I look at all 3 of them. At the end of this slide presentation, there's several links to the survey participation or to participate with the surveys. I'll show you real quick how it's going to come up, assuming it loads a little more quickly than that. There it goes. But didn't take this long last time. Anyway, it's a link. There's links in here to fill out the surveys, and here they go. So the deadline for the first one is in February. So one of the things that you can use to sort of talk about salaries or look at salaries is I tend, because I work for architects, try to present anything I can in a graphical format and use lots and lots of charts. And we've recently been using this chart as a means for communicating with staff. And we'll take a chart like this and say, look, here's the industry top, bottom, middle salary for someone with your years of experience, and we can talk with them, use this as a tool to have a conversation with our staff. We also, and I'll use this when we're talking a graph where I'll put all of our staff salaries on a graph like this, and our leadership team can look at it to see if we have salary equity. Are we paying our top performers? And our top performers should be in that upper quartile. If we said someone's a top performer and their salary is not there, we should have a conversation about it. It also helps us to kind of look at, who's in that lower quartile, and it makes us, kind of holds us accountable for doing what we say. One of the things I think that's most difficult for folks in this industry is we have a lot of really nice people in this industry. And this isn't me just being nice to you guys, but I've worked in a lot of different industries. These are the nicest people I've ever worked with, is architects and engineers. They're very nice, but we also don't like to tell people things that aren't good. And having a tool that kind of holds you to having that conversation, I find something like this very helpful. I'll also use this when we're trying to answer the question about salary equity between gender. I'll make all the women one color and all the men another color. And if the dots don't look right, then we need to start addressing it. It's also a tool I'll use to, I pull as many of the, much of the detail off of it as I can. And when I do that presentation, I'll show it to staff because we've got staff, particularly with millennials coming up. They have a lot of data and a lot of information at their disposal. And I'm looking to find ways to not just say we have salary equity between genders in the firm, but I want to be able to show it to them. And this was a tool I used with, it populated with the salaries. Again, I take the legend off and I take whatever those numbers on the graph, show them just the 3 bars, and I show where everybody is. I've found staff really appreciate that because, particularly when it comes to gender, everything they read, it tells staff that their women are not paid equitably, and so I just wanted to kind of address that. So how do you approach these salary conversations? If you're comfortable with what you've done, you should be able to defend any compensation decision. If you've been transparent about how you made those decisions in the first place, you should be able to have that conversation with any employee at any time. And I think having thought through your process beforehand helps you with that. Just accept that your staff are probably discussing their salaries, so you need to be very consistent in how you talk to each of them about their salaries. Use your compensation data. I just showed you that, and provide that honest feedback when an employee is meeting or not meeting expectations and where they are. A big thing for me is when you're showing someone who's not in the part of the graph they want to be in, well, that's your opportunity to have a discussion about how to get there. And I think that's, employees truly appreciate that, because there's nothing worse for somebody to find out, staff person, I'm not making as much as employee B, and I don't know why. So the last thing is, how do you know what motivates your staff, or understand what motivates your staff? There was a Harvard researcher who did a survey for engineers about what brings them job satisfaction, is sort of what makes them stay and what makes them leave. And the things that make people stay, it's achievement, it's recognition, it's what they're doing and how they feel about being valued for what they're doing. The things that make them leave are restrictive policies, bad supervisors, salary's in there, but it's down here. It's important, it needs to be right, but the things that make them stay are these factors over here. So understanding that's important. This was a survey of engineers. I will apologize for the blurriness of this graph, but I couldn't figure out how to get the nice image. But anyway, for architects, it's similar things, right? Are they doing something that matters? And do they understand and are they recognized for doing what matters? Here's a I'm going to do that. There's just a little YouTube video by a guy named Dan Pink, and you can see the whole thing, but it talks about what does and doesn't work when you're rewarding staff. So we're going to let him, this is just a little snippet of it. It's a good video if you ever want to go watch it. Like I said, it's on YouTube, and his name's Dan Pink.
Our motivations are unbelievable. I find I've been working in this for a few years. It's hard to so amazing. So I want to tell you about that. We are not as endlessly manipulable as explore these things. There's a whole set of fundamentally the calling question is this idea that if you reward something, you get more than you get on. Punish something, you get less. So let's go from London to the main street of Cambridge, Massachusetts, the northeastern part of the United States. Let's talk about the study done at MIT, Massachusetts Technology. Here's what they did. They took a whole group of students and they gave them a set of talents. Things like memorizing digits, solving word puzzles, other kinds of spatial puzzles, even physical tasks like throwing a ball through. Okay, they gave them these challenges. They said to incentivize their performance, they gave them 3 levels of reward. Okay, so if you did pretty well, you got a small monetary reward. If you did medium well, you got a medium monetary reward. And if you did really well, if you were one of the top performers, you got a large cash prize. Okay, we've seen this movie. This is essentially a typical motivation in the organization, right? You reward the very top performers, you ignore the low performers, and the other folks kind of in the middle. Okay, get a little bit. So what happens? They do the task, they have these incentives. Here's what they found out. 1, as long as the task involves only mechanical skills, bonuses work as they would be expected. The higher the pay, the better the performance. Okay, that makes sense. But here's what happens. But once the task calls for even rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward makes you for their performance. Now, this is strange, right? A larger reward makes you for performance. How can that possibly be? Now, what's interesting about this is that these folks here who did this are all economists. 2 at MIT, 1 at Stanford, Chicago, 1 in Carnegie Mellon. Okay, top tier of the economics. And they're reaching this conclusion that seems contrary to what a lot of us learned in economics, which is that the higher the reward, the better the performance. And they're saying that once you get above rudimentary cognitive skill, it's the other way around. It seems like this kind of the idea that these rewards don't work that way seems vaguely left-wing social, doesn't it? Kind of weird social. For those of you who have this experience, I want to point out to you this notorious left-wing socialist group that finances Federal Reserve Bank. So then there's the mainstream of the mainstream coming to a conclusion that's quite pleasant to the final laws of the behavioral system.
So, interesting study there. It matters. Bonuses matter. Compensation matters, but kind of supports what those other 2 groups surveys showed us. What matters is recognizing and that who's providing that verbal recognition, that constant feedback of you're doing well, you're not doing well, you're achieving something, you're successful. So next we're going to talk a little bit about how to stay competitive without overpaying. We already mentioned, you need to assume that everybody in your firm knows that everyone else makes. I've had lots of conversations with different people about whether or not, there's a school of thought that says you should tell everybody, there's one firm where a guy puts everybody's salary up and if on a door, and if you don't like it, you can come talk to him. I'm not comfortable doing that. We don't do that in our firm. But I talked with our staff about it and explained to them. I said, it's not my responsibility to tell your coworkers what you make. I tell you, I have a conversation with you, or we have a conversation with you about what you make. What you do with that is then your choice. I am not going to disclose that. That's not my responsibility, and that's not my obligation or decision. That's something each person has to make individually. But I also assume that they talk to each other. And I've found that actually happens, and then you have to have conversations with people. So be ready for that. The other thing is understanding, and I mentioned this before, what salaries are in your area and how to equalize for different locations. Salary surveys generally will present data at a national level, and they'll give you some regional information. But how do you know? I'm here in New Orleans. How do I know what people in New Orleans are paying in our industry compared to people, say, somebody's coming from Chicago? So how do I equalize for these? Or if you have a firm with multiple locations, how do you create something like that chart I just showed you, where everyone's salary is in a common, you've got apples to apples comparisons. So there's this wonderful resource, and it's free. I love free. Bureau of Labor Statistics gathers large quantities of data on compensation. And I've included these links here. I'm going to go there real quickly. And what you can do is, if you follow this link, the data is gathered annually by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The data is published usually in May. And what it will tell you is, for architects and engineers, it's this code, you need to know this, the 170000, and it'll tell you this is the median wage for all architects and engineers nationally, and there's 2.6 million people in that category, and the mean is 42.69. So there's your national. Well, if you know what the national salary is, there's another table, which is location salaries. And you can look at that table, and you pick your location. If you pick, say, Birmingham, Alabama, and you go to this same, I'm doing this quickly, but the instructions are kind of in here. You can go to the same category, and you can see that for Alabama, the median is 34.88. Well, if the national is 39, and the median in Birmingham is 34, you can do a little quick, especially all you engineers, you do a really quick math calculation, you get a factor, and you can location adjust any national survey you receive and see what your location, your individual location should be. So for example, New Orleans tends to be a little bit under the national average, and I can then take any survey and location adjust it for New Orleans. Something I can explain to our staff, if they are getting the AIA, because what happens most frequently, and I'm assuming a lot of you have the same thing, is someone goes, they get the AIA survey, they'll get the AIA regional survey, and they'll come to me, and then I can have the conversation. Well, that's great, but we're in New Orleans, so let's talk about what's different from New Orleans from that survey you have. It gives you a nice tool. If there's any Canadians, there is a link to a similar table for the Canadian salaries. So it's really useful and easy. If you really want to go down a rabbit hole, you can start exploring that Bureau of Labor Statistics data. They've got massive quantities of data and information, and you can definitely get lost in there. But I've given you the links to the ones that I think are most valuable for this conversation. The other thing I think it's important to do is align your mix of base salary, benefits, and incentive compensation with your firm's strategic goals. Like, we all have different profiles of what's important to us and what we want and what our strategy is. Are we really interested in growth, or is profitability our primary focus? Or we are a design firm. We are a design-centered business. So, that factors into all of the conversations we have, and understanding that is important. You have strategic goals, and there's a compensation strategy that should match that. And what we've found generally is, if you have a firm whose strategy is high growth, you probably should be paying above market salaries, and your bonuses are going to be a little lower. If you're interested in lower growth, but high profits, you can pay lower salaries, but you're going to pay higher bonuses. So you should be paying higher bonuses. Then if you're balanced, you're going to pay probably market salaries, and your bonuses are going to vary based on your profitability. The primary point here is that you need to balance your compensation strategy with your firm strategy. It shouldn't operate in a vacuum. When it gets to benefits, some interesting information here. The firms that grow the fastest have superior benefits, but when it comes to profitability, firms with competitive benefits are the most profitable. They're still going to achieve growth, but yeah, and this is just benefits, right? This isn't compensation. This is just the benefit side of it. So, there's some different, different strategies are going to have a different effect on your likelihood of profitability and growth. So, and the last point about how to stay competitive is to manage your incentive compensation so that it reinforces what you really care about, which is achievement and recognition. And there's two sorts of ways to approach your bonuses. There's a reward program, which says at the end of the year, we've got a pool of money, or at some point we just take some money and it's like, hey, you did a really good job, here's a reward. An incentive program is, if you do this, you will get this. And if you do it well, you're going to get this. Incentive programs tend to be more effective, I think, for management level staff. For your younger staff, or the lower end of the spectrum, the reward program, that just makes everybody really happy when they get the reward. What we've found in years and years of surveys and interaction with different firms is a good incentive program is better than a reward program, but a poor incentive program is worse. So you need to, if you don't have the time, and if you're not going to create a really robust incentive program, you're probably better off with a reward program. Stay away from formulas. We've started down that road a few times, and once I started showing our team kind of how you can game any formula we could come up with, we just put that aside. I think formulas, they often achieve unintentional consequences. So, our recommendation is define what's going to create, define the behaviors, and don't use formulas. So here's an example of some bonus criteria should you be generating them for PMs, and you can see this isn't formula-based metrics. It's, you're going to be based on your 40% on your budget and how your project performs compared to the budget, 40% on client satisfaction, and the rest is on how you work with the team and how you work with the rest of the firm. This is a whole hour-long normally webinar, so can't go too deep, but we do have in our benefits benchmarking tool or survey, the most common factors affecting incentive bonuses, so firm profitability, individual performance, we've kind of already talked about that, where they are in management, and individual effort. It's often called overtime. It tends to be subjective, so you can see that here, and then here's your project performance. So understanding that and how it works, you're going to have different bonus programs or different bonus requirements for different people in the firm. Obviously, I'm the CFO. My metrics are going to be very different from our director of design. So how are firms, are they satisfied with their programs? There's a group, 24% are very satisfied. You have, some satisfied, some not quite so satisfied. What we have found is very highly stratified bonus plans tend to be more successful. So, when you've got the highly stratified bonuses, those are the people that tend to be more satisfied with their plan, and their profits tend to be higher. During COVID, this was a snapshot from April, and I think the data has stayed fairly consistent. I'm curious to see what the final results will be for 2020. There are a lot of people who put bonus programs on hold. Think of a third, it's not, I guess that's a little less, that's less than that. I think I knew that. But, I think many of those programs came back, particularly if you consider, how our profits ended up for the year. So I'm curious to see what the end of the year in a larger sample size is going to do for us. So once you've come up with a compensation strategy and kind of figured out what you're going to do with your bonuses, how do you evaluate what performance indicators should you be looking at? The wrong one would be an individual utilization rate. We've collected data over years and years and years and have found very little correlation between utilization alone and profitability. And utilization is just your direct labor divided by your total payroll, your total salary. What we have found is high correlation between revenue factors. Revenue factor, which is your labor utilization times a direct labor multiplier. And a direct labor multiplier is your billing rate divided by your hourly wage, and that's when you're talking about it at an individual level. What's nice about this revenue factor is it can be scaled up to the firm level, and you can even work on it at the project level. Here's the correlation between revenue factor and profitability. The red line is profitability and the blue line is revenue factors. You can see they're pretty heavily linked. The third piece of this puzzle, if you wanted to get it completely tied up, would be to throw in overhead. Overhead only has a great impact when it's when your profitability is going up significantly or down significantly, but that's again another story for another day. What we have seen is that in firms, when they look at the revenue factor for their different positions, the interior designers and architects tend to have the highest revenue factors. It doesn't mean that's all you should do. There's a lot of reasons for that. And generally, it's because your billing rate is influenced by market market requirements. And you've seen architects and interior designers tend to be on a lower pay scale than engineers. Working from anywhere and how that's impacting compensation and where we are right now. So what we saw during COVID is that firms have been reporting higher revenue factors, but higher utilization, but maybe their revenue factors weren't as high. Prior to COVID, we were seeing more and more, it was called teleworking, it's now work from home, but you were seeing more firms were offering it and more staff. I think after COVID, we're going to see a little bit of a change. Large firms were the most likely to allow work from home, and that's probably, they were spread out nationally, so it was a lot easier to just work from home. What we did see during COVID, the top graph there is the change in utilization, and everyone was reporting, everybody's working so much more, utilization's gone up. But what we found in firms under 100 is that their direct labor multiplier was going down. And for larger firms, it was higher. It was a little bit higher. It was about the same. And we think that's because larger firms had more robust infrastructure in place to be able to pivot to 100% working from home. I think it's been more of a struggle. We're used to working in our studio together, even if we did have flexible work arrangements, we're mostly working from our studios. So as we get the results for the balance of the year, this was through June, so I'm very curious to see how we're going to end up. When you have staff working from anywhere, literally, it's going to affect your strategy and how to set salaries. And there's kind of two components to that. One is going to be, what do you do in the short term? As you're bringing new people on, it's easy. You can do a location adjusted salary. If our studio is in San Francisco, but I'm hiring somebody in Des Moines, Iowa, I'm not going to pay them the same as I would pay my San Francisco staff. So you need to handle that for new hires. And that's almost the easy part. Harder part is, how do you handle this migration we're hearing and seeing of staff who are moving out of, and I'll use San Francisco, moving out of San Francisco to somewhere more remote where the cost of living, they can rent, buy a house for, a tenth of what they can buy a house for in San Francisco. Their salary, in essence, the staff person just got a huge raise. And over time, you're going to have to equalize that. So you need to be planning for that. You need to be thinking about it. And you need to be talking with your staff who are moving as to how you're going to handle that. So here's why that's important, or why it matters. If you pick 3 places in California San Francisco, San Diego, both pretty large cities, and then Modesto. Well, if you've got people from your San Francisco that have moved out to a place like Modesto, the hourly rate average is less than $11. It's $11 lower, more than $11 lower. That's pretty significant. And if you're just hiring somebody in Modesto and they're going to work for you, well, that's easy. You'd be paying them $37.11. But right now you're paying your person $48 an hour, and they're moving to Modesto. So you've got to reconcile that. One of the reasons we don't advise using cost of living is if Modesto is at national cost of living, San Diego's 35% higher than the national average. Their salaries are 35% higher than the national average. And if you look at San Francisco, their cost of living is 86% higher, but their salaries are definitely not 86% higher. So understanding the location adjustment and how that's going to affect you longer term is going to be important to make some decisions and to talk to your staff about it. The other last piece of this, and we're kind of getting to the end, I'm hoping I'm leaving some time for some questions. What is going to happen to overhead? We're hearing a lot of conversation about offices, maybe square footage. So here's the next poll: are you expecting to reduce the square footage of your office post-COVID? If we're going to be more of our staff, we've seen we're going to have a lot more people working remotely. Maybe you don't need as much office space. I've seen tons and tons of articles written about that. And so that's going to be in the surveys we're going to be sending out or collecting over the next few weeks. But I'd like to kind of see what you guys think.
Okay, we're going to leave it open for a couple of seconds more. And I'm going to close it right now. And let's see, they've already reduced 6%, plan to reduce 15%. Sorry, that's a typo. Will no longer have an office, 1%. Plan to maintain the same space, 62%. Have not decided, 17%.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are curious to see how we're going to, offices are going to change. Our offices, we design offices, so how are our clients' offices going to change? I think it's going to be very interesting. I think I tend to be a very social, maybe that's it. The extroverts are like, I just want to be by people. And the introverts are like, I kind of like this, but I still occasionally want to see somebody. So I think it's going to be very interesting. If you've noticed, I'm working in our studio, and I have been because I'm a control freak and I like to control my space, and I couldn't control it as much at home. And I like to have the finger on the pulse of things that are going on, but that's just me. So yeah, you've got lots of different people with lots of different perspectives, and we're going to have to figure out how to accommodate that. However, when PSMJ, one of our surveys, we did a survey in April and then in August, and this sort of matches what our little poll just showed us, that people don't want to work entirely from home. They don't want to work entirely from the office. They like that flexibility, and it seems like it kind of changes going back and forth about where they want to work and how they want to work. So will be, like I said, be interesting to see what metrics come back when we do our survey this year. This was an earlier executive briefing. 50% we'll still have how many staff will still work from home after the pandemic. And the square footage question, right? Keep this, ours was a little different. More are going to keep it the same. I think people are kind of backing away from that concept. One of the last things I threw in here, wanted to look at this because it's something I've seen for our firm, and I've heard about with a lot of firms. As we're doing more virtual and remote work, we're finding we need more tools. So while we might be reducing our office spaces or our office overhead might be decreasing, I think we're going to see some pretty significant jumps in IT expenses. And you can see for the past 10 years, it's been going up, creeping up pretty much every year. I have a feeling for the 2021 survey, we're gonna get something a good bit higher. So the surveys, there's some benefits, right? I already told you, you get the 3 free benchmarking tools, yay, free stuff. But you can also get, so it's a benchmarking tool, sort of an overview with key metrics. There's an entire survey report that takes every position for every firm size and looks at, mean, median, and gets it really in depth. It's a pretty robust report. Well, you get a 50% discount on that, and you can win a card, a gift card. So the 3 surveys should be coming out late spring, early summer, and that's when those benefit tools come out. In case you're planning to use them, you get those 3 tools. And here's again the link. This link will take you, there's a financial survey too. I highly recommend using that one. Always interesting to see what the metrics are and what profitability is and how firms are reaching that. So the financial survey goes to the same way. So I talk really fast. So if there's any questions or anybody wants to ask anything, I'll be happy to answer them. You can either put it in the chat, or Kathy, how can they let you know they want to talk?
They could start putting them in either chat or the question. They probably just have a question panel, but we already have some in already. Okay. I'm going to try to consolidate a couple, but one of the things they said, you're a financial person. Do you think it should be all financial, or do you work with HR? How does that work when you decide?
So I do both. In our firm, we're a 50-person firm, so I am HR and finance. I think I come from things from a financial perspective, but because of the role I play here, I have to kind of put on a different hat occasionally and look at things from the HR side. I don't know if that answered your question.
What percentage of profit should be in the bonus pool?
So I see different firms. For us, we take about 25% go into the general staff bonus pools. I think that's fairly common, 20 to 25%. And that includes when I put that number there, that's our 401k match too, because kind of that's where that comes from for us. But somewhere in that 20 to 25%, that seems reasonable. Our staff is well aware of that. I kind of go through what we use profits for. I think in our industry, sometimes we're a little, at least I found this with architects, they tend to be a little bit embarrassed sometimes about making profits. And I've tried to be real transparent and open about why we need profits and talking to our staff about why we need profits. So.
One of the questions was, when you talk about experience and performance, this might be a little different, but where do you put licensure? In experience, or is it separate?
I put it as a tier. So for us, here's and most of the surveys do this. There's the unlicensed and the licensed salary tier. So I have it as a different tier. And it's a little bit more for license. And architecture, I think licensing, at least for our firm, licensing matters a great deal. I think in engineering, it's a professional engineering designation, and I don't know if for them the certificate, the license is as critical. I think it is.
So this will be the last question. We're getting close to the end. The person was asking, you talked a little bit about when someone moves, let's say that they either move to a separate office of the same firm, or they are now moving further away and working from home. How do you have that conversation if they're making a good salary and so forth?
Yeah. So, I've been, as I was going through this, I was really thinking about that as, how would I handle that conversation? And I think I would take the data and sit down with them and say, look, here's where you are in your salary and where you're moving. Here's salary for that area. And you can see there's a difference here. Over time, we're going to sort of equalize your salary. You're still going to get raises and for a long time, you're going to get increase in your compensation, but it might not be as much as it would be had you stayed in San Francisco or whatever, the more expensive city. And kind of walk them through that, get their feedback on it. And I try to envision what the staff person's response is, and I haven't had any of these conversations yet, so I'm kind of curious what a staff person's perspective is. But I think I would approach it that way. It's like, look, right now you've just gotten this really nice bump. You've basically gotten a 20-30% raise maybe. So your raises over the next few years aren't going to be as robust as a result.
Right. Although some people are moving to another city to help build an office, so that could probably be part of the conversation as well.
Yeah.
All right, so that is going to wrap it up. I want to remind you, people are asking. Yes, I'm going to share the slides with everyone. I'll send out a link. I'll send out the information for the video that was on YouTube so that you can watch it if you want, and also where you can get your AIA. And anything else, if you want to send us a message, I am c.cesari@PSMJ, but I will share Jen Navard's as well, her email, because she so graciously said that she would try to get to everyone's question. But I will be giving her the questions that we didn't get to. And I hope to send that letter out today or at the latest tomorrow. Jen, anything else you want to add? Or
No, happy Mardi Gras. If anybody's interested, there's this really cool crew of house floats, since we can't have Mardi Gras this year. If you want to see creativity at its finest, it's KREWE of house floats, and people in New Orleans are decorating their houses instead of making floats this year. So it's really fun. And so on Mardi Gras Day, there's a map you can go, and we can kind of have our own little socially distanced Mardi Gras. So there's your fun fact for the day.
All right, nice. I know I've seen them pop up on Instagram, so they're beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, guys, everybody have a great afternoon, and I'll try to get to everyone's question, make sure we get to them. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Bye-bye.